Fear has a way of speaking loudly in our lives. It whispers that the problem is too big, that the mountain is too high, and that the battle is already lost before we even try. Fear tries to convince us that we are alone, powerless, and surrounded by circumstances that cannot change. But when you look through the lens of faith, you begin to understand something powerful. Fear may be loud, but it is never greater than the power of God. Many people live their lives controlled by fear. Fear of failure, fear of the future, fear of what others think, fear of stepping into the unknown. But fear was never meant to be the force that directs your life. Fear is a signal, not a master. It tries to convince you that the situation in front of you is bigger than the God who stands behind you. Yet the truth is that God has never lost a battle, never been surprised by a problem, and never been limited by human circumstances. When fear shows up, it often magnifies the problem while minimizing the presence of God. It causes us to stare at the storm instead of the one who controls the wind and the waves. The problem is not that fear appears. The problem is when we allow fear to define our response. Because the moment you begin to remember who God is, fear begins to lose its authority over your life. God's power operates on a level that fear cannot comprehend. Fear sees closed doors, but God creates new paths. Fear sees impossibilities, but God specializes in what humans call impossible. Fear says you cannot move forward, but God says that with him all things are possible. When you shift your focus from the size of your problem to the greatness of God, something begins to change inside of you. Courage begins to rise where fear once lived. Think about the times in life when everything looked uncertain. The moments when the path ahead seemed dark and unclear. In those moments, fear tries to take control of your thoughts and your decisions. But faith reminds you that God is already present in the future you are worried about. He is not just aware of your situation. He is actively working within it. God's power does not eliminate challenges, but it transforms the way you face them. Instead of running from fear, you begin to stand in faith. Instead of focusing on the obstacles, you begin to focus on the one who has authority over every obstacle. The moment you recognize that God's power is greater than your fear, fear loses its ability to paralyze you. Sometimes God allows us to face situations that feel overwhelming so that we can learn to rely on his strength rather than our own. If everything in life were easy, we might never discover how powerful God truly is. But when we reach the limits of our own ability, that is often where God's power begins to show itself in the greatest way. Fear wants to convince you to stay where it is safe, comfortable, and predictable. But faith calls you to step forward, trusting that God is already preparing the way ahead of you. The power of God does not simply remove fear. It gives you the courage to move forward even when fear is present. So when fear knocks on the door of your life, remember this truth. Fear may be real, but it is never greater than the power of God. The same God who created the universe, who holds the stars in place, and who sustains the world with his word is the same God who walks with you through every challenge you face. And when you truly understand that God's power is greater than your fear, you begin to live differently. You begin to pray with confidence. You begin to walk with boldness. You begin to walk with boldness. You begin to trust that no matter what stands in front of you, the power of God stands above it. Fear may try to speak, but God's power has the final word. Fear has a powerful way of magnifying problems in our lives. It takes a challenge and makes it appear bigger than it really is. It takes uncertainty and turns it into a mountain that feels impossible to climb. Fear whispers to the mind and convinces the heart that the situation is too difficult, the obstacles are too strong, and the outcome will not be good. When fear takes control, it begins to shape the way we see everything around us. The problem grows larger in our minds while hope grows smaller. Our focus shifts away from possibility and becomes fixed on limitation. Many times the situation itself is not the real issue. The real issue is the way fear distorts our perspective. Fear acts like a magnifying glass placed over the problem. It enlarges every negative detail. It repeats worst-case scenarios again and again in our thoughts. It tells us that the door will never open, the solution will never come, and the situation will never change. The longer we listen to fear, the more convincing its voice becomes. Eventually, the problem begins to look greater than our strength, greater than our resources, and greater than our future. Fear also narrows our vision. When people are afraid, they stop seeing opportunities and start seeing only obstacles. Fear trains the mind to expect failure before a step is even taken. It causes people to doubt their ability, question their purpose, and hesitate when it is time to move forward. Instead of stepping out with courage, they stay where they are because fear convinces them that movement will only lead to more difficulty. But faith operates in a completely different way. Faith does not ignore the existence of problems, but it refuses to give those problems the final authority. Faith changes the direction of our focus. Instead of concentrating on the size of the obstacle, faith focuses on the greatness of God. While fear enlarges the problem, faith enlarges the understanding of God's power. Faith reminds us that the challenges we face may be real, but they are never greater than the one who created the heavens and the earth. When a person begins to see life through faith, the situation itself may not immediately change, but the perspective begins to shift. What once looked impossible begins to look manageable. What once looked permanent begins to look temporary. Faith reminds us that God has the ability to do what human strength cannot accomplish. It reminds us that there is a power working beyond what we can see with our natural eyes. Faith does something remarkable in the heart. It restores clarity where fear once created confusion. Instead of allowing the mind to be filled with doubts and worst-case scenarios, faith fills the heart with confidence in God's ability to work in every situation. The focus moves away from how big is the problem and shifts toward how great is the power of God. That change in focus begins to reshape how a person approaches life. When faith magnifies God's power, courage begins to replace fear. A person who understands the greatness of God is no longer paralyzed by circumstances. They begin to take steps forward even when the road ahead is uncertain. They begin to trust that God's strength will meet them where their own strength runs out. Faith does not mean pretending the problem is small. It means believing that God is greater than whatever stands in front of you. Another powerful effect of faith is that it quiets the voice of fear. Fear thrives on attention. The more we focus on the problem, the louder fear becomes. But when attention shifts toward God's character, His promises, and His power, fear begins to lose its influence. The problem may still exist, but it no longer dominates the heart. Faith creates stability where fear once produced anxiety. Life will always contain moments where problems appear large and intimidating. Life will always contain moments where problems appear large and intimidating. There will be seasons when the challenges seem overwhelming and the path forward feels unclear. But those moments become turning points when a person chooses faith over fear. When faith magnifies God's power, the problem is placed in its proper position. It is no longer the center of attention. The greatness of God changes the scale of everything. What once looked enormous becomes small compared to His authority. What once seemed impossible becomes an opportunity for His power to be displayed. When faith magnifies God, the heart begins to see life through a new lens, one where problems exist, but God's power stands far above them. There are moments in life when situations arise that feel overwhelming, problems appear suddenly, circumstances shift beyond our control, and uncertainty begins to fill the mind. In those moments, it is easy for people to feel alone, as if they are facing the storm by themselves. The weight of the situation can feel heavy, and the path forward may seem unclear. But the truth that changes everything is this: God's presence is greater than any situation you face. Human beings often measure their circumstances by what they can see. When the challenge looks big, it feels powerful. When the future looks uncertain, it feels threatening. When the road ahead appears blocked, it feels like there is no way forward. Our natural instincts cause us to evaluate situations based on visible evidence. If the obstacle is large, we assume defeat is close. If the challenge is complicated, we assume the outcome will be difficult. But God does not operate according to human limitations. The presence of God introduces a P over into every situation that cannot be measured by human understanding. God is not limited by time, resources, or human ability. What seems complicated to people is simple to Him. What appears impossible to human reasoning is completely possible through His power. When God is present, the situation is never as hopeless as it may appear. One of the greatest struggles people face is remembering God's presence when circumstances become difficult. When life is calm and things are going well, it is easy to speak about faith. But when pressure increases and challenges arise, fear often tries to take control of the mind. In those moments, people may begin to focus more on the problem than on God. They begin to think about what could go wrong rather than remembering who is standing with them. Yet God's presence does not disappear when problems appear. In fact, many times His presence becomes even more evident during the most difficult seasons of life. Challenges have a way of revealing where our trust truly rests. When human strength reaches its limits, people begin to discover the power that comes from relying on God instead of relying only on themselves. God's presence brings stability into unstable situations. When everything around a person seems uncertain, the awareness that God is near provides a foundation that cannot be shaken. The situation may still be challenging, but the heart becomes stronger because it knows it is not facing the battle alone. God's presence turns moments of fear into opportunities for trust. Many times, the greatest battles people face are not external, but internal. The struggle within the mind can be stronger than the challenge outside. Thoughts of doubt, worry, and fear try to dominate the mind and control emotions. But when a person remembers that God is present, those thoughts begin to lose their authority. The mind begins to shift from anxiety to trust, from panic to peace. God's presence also brings guidance when the path forward is unclear. There are seasons when people do not know what decision to make or what direction to take. The future may look uncertain, and every option may seem confusing, but God is not confused about the future. He already sees what lies ahead, and His presence provides the wisdom needed to take the next step. Sometimes the entire path is not revealed at once, but God provides direction one step at a time. Another powerful aspect of God's presence is the strength it provides. Life can drain emotional and spiritual energy, especially during seasons of difficulty. People may feel tired, discouraged, or ready to give up. But God's presence renews strength when human strength runs out. It reminds the heart that there is still hope, still purpose, and still a way forward. God's presence also changes the way people approach their challenges. Instead of responding with fear, they begin to respond with faith. Instead of expecting defeat, they begin to expect God to work in ways they cannot yet see. The problem may still exist, but the confidence that God is present creates a different mindset. Fear begins to fade and courage begins to rise. When a person truly understands that God's presence is greater than any situation, their perspective on life begins to transform. The storms of life no longer feel like the end of the story. Difficult seasons become moments where faith grows stronger. Obstacles become opportunities to witness God's power in action. Situations will change throughout life. Some will be easy, while others will be extremely difficult. But one truth remains constant. God's presence is never absent. No matter how complex the challenge may appear, no situation has the authority to overpower the presence of God. Fear has a powerful ability to take control of a person's mind. It begins quietly, often with a single thought of doubt or worry. Over time, that thought grows stronger, repeating itself again and again until it becomes difficult to ignore. The mind begins to imagine worst-case scenarios, and suddenly the problem seems much bigger than it actually is. Fear thrives in that environment because it feeds on attention. The more we focus on the problem, the stronger fear becomes. Many people do not realize how much their focus shapes their emotions and decisions. What you continually look at begins to influence what you believe. When your mind stays fixed on the obstacle, your confidence slowly weakens. The problem appears larger, the path forward appears more difficult, and fear begins to tighten its grip. It becomes harder to see possibilities because your vision is dominated by the challenge in front of you. Fear often convinces people that the situation is permanent and unchangeable. It tells them that the problem is too complicated, too large, or too overwhelming to overcome. It encourages them to replay the same negative thoughts repeatedly. Every time the mind revisits the problem, fear grows stronger. The mind becomes trapped in a cycle where the obstacle is constantly magnified. But there is a powerful shift that occurs when a person changes their focus. Instead of concentrating on the size of the problem, they begin to focus on God. This shift may seem simple, but it carries tremendous power. When attention moves away from the obstacle and toward God's power, something begins to change within the heart. The problem may still exist, but it no longer dominates the mind in the same way. Focusing on God reminds the heart that there is a power greater than the challenge being faced. It shifts the conversation inside the mind from doubt to faith. Instead of asking, how will this ever work out? The heart begins, ask, what can God do in this situation? That change in thinking weakens the influence of fear. Fear depends on the belief that the problem has the final authority, but faith recognizes that God's authority is greater. When people focus on their problems, they often feel trapped by circumstances they cannot control. They begin to measure their future by the difficulty of the present moment. The mind becomes filled with questions that lead to anxiety. What if things get worse? What if there is no solution? What if the situation never changes? Those thoughts create emotional pressure and make the situation feel even heavier. However, focusing on God creates a different emotional environment. It brings peace where worry once dominated. Instead of being overwhelmed by uncertainty, the heart begins to rest in trust. God's character, his power, and his faithfulness become the center of attention rather than the problem itself. The mind begins to remember that God has worked through difficult situations before and can do it again. Another important effect of focusing on God is that it restores perspective. Problems often appear larger when they are the only thing we see. But when God becomes the focus, the problem is placed in its proper position. It becomes something that is real but not all powerful. The obstacle may still require effort, patience, and faith, but it no longer defines the entire situation. Focusing on God also strengthens courage. Courage does not mean the absence of fear. It means the willingness to move forward despite fear. When a person remembers that God is greater than the challenge, they gain the strength to take the next step. Fear may still whisper in the background, but it no longer controls the direction of their life. This shift in focus also influences decisions. When fear controls the mind, people often hesitate or avoid action. They remain stuck in the same place because they are afraid of what might happen. But when the focus moves to God, confidence begins to grow. People begin to step forward with faith, trusting that God is guiding their path, even when the outcome is not fully visible. The more a person focuses on God, the quieter fear becomes. Fear cannot dominate a heart that is continually reminded of God's power and presence. Instead of being overwhelmed by problems, the heart begins to develop resilience. Challenges may still appear, but they are faced with a deeper sense of trust and strength. Over time, this change in focus transforms the way a person approaches life. Difficult situations are no longer viewed only as threats. They become opportunities to trust God in a deeper way. Fear loses its control because attention is no longer fixed on the problem. Instead, the mind is centered on the one whose power is far greater than any obstacle that may appear. Challenges are often viewed as interruptions to the life we want to live. When problems appear, people naturally wish they would disappear as quickly as possible. Difficult situations can bring stress, uncertainty, and discomfort, and the first instinct is usually to escape them. Yet many of the most powerful moments of growth and transformation happen not in the absence of challenges, but in the middle of them. What appears to be an obstacle can actually become an opportunity for God's power to be revealed. When everything in life is going smoothly, it is easy for people to rely mostly on their own strength and understanding. Success and comfort can create the illusion that human ability alone is enough to manage life. But challenges have a way of reminding us of our limitations. They push us to the edge of what we can control and force us to confront situations that require more than our own resources. In those moments, we begin to realize that there is a greater power available to us. Challenges reveal the difference between self-reliance and faith. When life becomes difficult, people quickly discover how limited their own strength can be. Plans may fail, expectations may collapse, and circumstances may change without warning. Yet it is precisely in these moments that God's power can become most visible. When human solutions run out, the door opens for divine intervention. Many of the greatest demonstrations of faith happen during seasons of difficulty. Challenges create a stage where God's power can work in ways that would not be visible during easier times. If every situation could be solved by human effort alone, there would be little room to recognize the greatness of God's involvement. But when a situation goes beyond human ability, it creates space for something greater to happen. Challenges also strengthen faith in a way that comfort cannot. When people face obstacles and see God guiding them through those difficulties, their trust in Him grows deeper. Each challenge becomes a reminder that God is present and active, even when circumstances appear uncertain. The struggle itself becomes part of a larger story where faith is being developed and refined. Another powerful aspect of challenges is that they often reveal strengths that people did not realize they possessed. Difficult moments push individuals beyond their comfort zones. They require patience, perseverance, and courage. While the experience may be uncomfortable, it produces growth that could not occur in easier circumstances. Over time, people begin to recognize that the challenge they feared was actually shaping them into a stronger person. Challenges also shift priorities. During seasons of comfort, it is easy for people to become distracted by things that ultimately do not matter. But when difficulties arise, the heart begins to focus on what is truly important. Faith, purpose, and trust in God move to the center of attention. The challenge becomes a moment where deeper spiritual understanding begins to develop. In addition, challenges can become powerful testimonies. When God's power is revealed in the middle of a difficult situation, it does not only impact the person going through the struggle. Others who witness that transformation are encouraged as well. A challenge that once seemed like a burden can become a story that strengthens the faith of many people. It is important to remember that challenges do not mean God is absent. In fact, they often indicate that something significant is taking place beneath the surface. Growth, character, and faith are being developed in ways that cannot always be seen immediately.
What feels like a delay or difficulty may actually be preparation for something greater. Sometimes people pray for strength, wisdom, or deeper faith, without realizing that these qualities often grow through difficult experiences.
Challenges provide the environment where these qualities can develop. Patience grows when waiting is required. Courage grows when fear must be faced. Trust grows when the outcome is uncertain. Over time, a person begins to see challenges differently. Instead of viewing them only as problems, they begin to see them as opportunities for God to work in unexpected ways. The difficulty may still be real, but it no longer carries the same sense of defeat. Instead, it becomes a moment where God's power can be demonstrated. When God works through a challenge, the outcome often goes far beyond what people originally imagined. Situations that once seemed impossible begin to change. Solutions appear where none were visible before. Strength is discovered in places where weakness once existed. Through it all, the challenge becomes a reminder that God's power is not limited by human circumstances. In the end, challenges have the potential to become turning points. What once looked like an obstacle can become a doorway through which God's power is revealed in a powerful and unforgettable way. Faith has a unique way of transforming how a person moves through life, especially when fear is present. Many people assume that courage means the absence of fear, but that is not the reality of human experience. Fear is a natural reaction to uncertainty, danger, and situations that feel beyond our control. The presence of fear does not mean a person lacks faith. Instead, the real test of faith appears when someone chooses to move forward even while fear is still whispering in their mind. Fear often tries to stop progress before it even begins. It fills the mind with doubts and questions that create hesitation. It tells people they are not ready, not strong enough, or not capable enough to face the situation ahead. Fear tries to convince them that stepping forward will only lead to failure or disappointment. Because of this, many people remain stuck in the same place for long periods of time, not because opportunities are absent, but because fear has convinced them that movement is too risky. Faith challenges that mindset by introducing trust into the situation. Faith reminds the heart that the future is not controlled by fear, but by God. When someone begins to trust in God's guidance and power, the influence of fear starts to weaken. The situation may still feel uncertain, and the path ahead may still be unclear, but faith provides the courage to take the next step anyway. Moving forward with faith does not mean having all the answers. In fact, many of the most important steps in life happen when the entire path is not yet visible. Faith is the decision to trust that God is already present in the future, even when we cannot yet see how everything will unfold. It allows a person to step into the unknown with confidence that they are not walking alone. Fear often focuses on what could go wrong. It highlights every possible negative outcome and repeats those possibilities until they begin to feel inevitable. This constant focus on potential failure can create a sense of paralysis. People begin to overanalyze every decision and delay every action because they are trying to eliminate all risk. Unfortunately, waiting for complete certainty often means waiting forever. Faith changes the focus from potential failure to God's ability to guide and sustain. Instead of asking, what if everything goes wrong? Faith begins to ask, what if God is leading me into something greater than I can imagine? That shift in thinking opens the door for courage to grow. The presence of fear may still be felt, but it no longer has the authority to determine the direction of a person's life. Other powerful effect of faith is that it strengthens resilience. When people move forward in faith, they understand that challenges may still appear along the way. Progress does not always mean an easy path. There may be obstacles, delays, or unexpected turns. But faith creates a deeper sense of stability because it trusts that God is working through every step of the journey. Faith also builds confidence through experience. Each time a person takes a step forward despite fear and sees God provide strength, guidance, or opportunity, their trust grows stronger. What once seemed impossible becomes evidence that fear does not have the final word. Over time, the memory of past victories begins to replace the doubts that fear once created. In many cases, the greatest blessings in life exist on the other side of fear. Opportunities for growth, purpose, and transformation often require stepping beyond what feels safe and familiar. Fear tries to keep people within the boundaries of comfort, but faith encourages them to trust that God's plans extend far beyond those boundaries. Moving forward with faith also influences others. When people witness someone stepping into uncertainty with trust in God, it inspires them to examine their own fears and limitations. Courage has a ripple effect. One person's faith can become the encouragement another person needs to take their own step forward. Faith does not promise that fear will disappear completely, but it changes the relationship a person has with fear. Instead of being controlled by it, they learn to move beyond it. Fear may still appear in moments of uncertainty, but faith reminds the heart that God's power is greater than any fear that tries. to stand in the way. Over time, the practice of walking by faith builds a life marked by courage, trust, and purpose. Each step forward becomes a declaration that fear will not determine the outcome. Instead, faith continues to guide the journey, leading a person toward the future that God has prepared for them. There are times in life when fear seems like an unavoidable companion. It can appear suddenly triggered by unexpected challenges, or it can slowly build over time, feeding on uncertainty and doubt. Fear has a way of convincing people that they are alone in their struggles and that their circumstances are too difficult to overcome. It often clouds judgment, overwhelms the mind, and creates hesitation in moments when decisive action is needed. But one of the most important truths to remember is that God is always present, even when fear is loud. And when we recognize his presence, fear begins to lose its power. Fear wants to dominate because it relies on the mind's focus. The more attention we give to fear, the stronger it becomes. When fear occupies the center of our thoughts, it magnifies the challenges before us, turning problems that may be manageable into mountains that feel insurmountable. It distorts reality, convincing us that the obstacles are bigger than they really are and that we are weaker than we truly are. This magnification leads to hesitation and indecision, and it can prevent us from stepping forward into opportunities God has prepared for us. The presence of God changes the dynamics of fear. God is not limited by the size of our problems, the number of obstacles we face, or the depth of our uncertainty. His power transcends human limitations and offers stability, guidance, and strength where fear seeks only to paralyze. Recognizing that God is with us shifts the perspective from being problem-focused to being God-focused. Instead of seeing ourselves as isolated and powerless, we begin to see ourselves as accompanied and strengthened by the one who is greater than any fear we encounter. Faith is the lens through which fear is measured against God's power. While fear emphasizes the difficulties, faith emphasizes the presence of God. When fear tells us that the situation is too complex, faith reminds us that God is omnipotent and always able to provide solutions. When fear emphasizes the impossibility of the outcome, faith focuses on God's ability to make a way where no way seems possible. By keeping attention on God rather than on fear, we begin to reclaim control over our thoughts, emotions, and actions. The awareness of God's presence also provides emotional stability. Life storms can create inner turmoil, leaving the heart anxious and the mind unsettled. When people focus solely on the challenges, worry and despair can dominate, leading to indecision or rash actions. But when a person consciously acknowledges that God is present, the mind begins to experience calm and the heart gains confidence. The storms may still exist, but they no longer define the emotional state. Knowing God is with us provides peace and reassurance that the outcome is not left to chance or human strength alone. Experiencing God's presence also encourages action. Fear often freezes people in place, making them wait for a sense of safety or certainty that may never come. But when we trust that God is accompanying us, courage rises and steps forward become possible even in the face of uncertainty. Faith does not promise that fear will disappear completely, but it guarantees that we are not alone as we navigate challenges. The focus shifts from being controlled by fear to being guided by God's wisdom and strength. Fear often isolates, convincing people that they must handle everything on their own. But God's presence eliminates that isolation. God is actively involved in our circumstances, working in ways we may not immediately perceive. Even when the path seems unclear or the obstacles seem overwhelming, his presence is constant. Recognizing this reality transforms the way we engage with challenges. Instead of seeing problems as insurmountable, we begin to approach them with trust and determination, confident that God's power is greater than our fear. Another important aspect is that God's presence strengthens perseverance. Challenges rarely resolve instantly. Some difficulties require patience, repeated effort, and endurance over time. Fear can make the process seem unbearable, but when we lean on God's presence, we gain the resilience needed to continue. Knowing that God is walking with us allows us to persist even when outcomes are delayed or progress is slow. When God's presence is acknowledged, fear loses its authority. The same fears that once seemed overwhelming become manageable, 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 B.O.B. The problem may still exist and fear may still arise, but it no longer dictates decisions, emotions, or actions. Faith empowers the heart to move forward confidently, relying on God's guidance and strength rather than succumbing to doubt. Over time, a consistent awareness of God's presence creates a life marked by courage, peace, and trust. Fear may appear in certain seasons, but it no longer has the final word. By choosing to focus on God instead of fear, a person begins to experience freedom, clarity, and strength. God's presence becomes the anchor in the storms of life, reminding the heart that no situation is too great for him and that his power is always sufficient to overcome any fear that tries to take hold. Faith is not simply the absence of fear, it is the courage to move forward despite fear. Life is filled with moments of uncertainty that test our resolve and push us beyond our comfort zones. Fear naturally arises in these moments because it is a protective instinct warning us of potential danger or failure. However, the presence of fear does not have to dictate our actions. True faith allows us to act with confidence, knowing that God is with us and that his power is greater than any fear that may try to hold us back. Fear often presents itself as an internal barrier, creating hesitation and doubt. It whispers that we are not strong enough, not prepared enough, or not capable of handling the circumstances before us. When fear dominates the mind, it can immobilize, convincing people to wait until conditions feel safer or until the outcome appears certain. The irony is that waiting for fear to disappear often means waiting indefinitely, because fear never fully disappears on its own. It is faith that allows us to step forward even when fear is present, trusting that God's guidance will meet us in the journey. Faith transforms how we respond to fear by shifting focus from the obstacle to the one who is greater than it. When people focus solely on the problem, it grows larger in their minds and fear gains strength. The imagination begins to replay worst-case scenarios over and over, creating a sense of paralysis. But when attention moves to God, fear begins to lose its grip. God's power, wisdom, and presence become the central focus, and suddenly the challenges seem less overwhelming. Faith allows a person to measure the situation not by its apparent size, but by God's authority and ability to intervene. Courage is not the absence of fear, it is the ability to act in spite of fear. When faith is present, it gives a person the strength to move forward even when uncertainty surrounds.